Mimicry is a technique similar to camouflage, where something appears as something else, not to blend in but to stand out against a mottled background, much like camouflage in warfare. Initially, the British Empire aimed to mimic the British Constitution in all its colonies, but this policy has become outdated. Colonies that have forgotten their insignificance and defied the mother country must bear the consequences. The forgotten principle of colonial dependence undermines the idea of granting colonies independence, as they would not remain colonies if they could stand independently. Post Enlightenment English colonialism often employs a deceitful language to assert authority through satire and farce. The civilizing mission, though human and not wholly human, produces texts rich in irony, mimicry, and repetition. Mimicry becomes a complex and effective strategy within the colonial power structure. It embodies an ironic compromise within the conflicting dynamics of colonial discourse described by Edward Said. Mimicry is inherently ambivalent, continuously revealing its differences and excesses. Its authority is weakened by its own indeterminacy, representing a difference that denies itself. Mimicry functions as a dual strategy of control and appropriation, simultaneously appropriating the other while displaying power. It poses a threat to established knowledge and disciplinary powers. The impact of mimicry on colonial discourse is profound. By normalizing colonial subjects or states, it determines the language of liberty and produces alternative norms. This ambivalence is evident in Locke's second treatise, where the concept of liberty is undermined by its double usage in the context of slavery. The success of colonial appropriation relies on the proliferation of inappropriate objects, ensuring its strategic failure. Charles Grant's work, Observations on the State of Society Among the Asiatic Subjects of Great Britain, published in 1792, exemplifies this partiality. Grant suggests that Christianity and moral improvements will mold a suitable colonial subjectivity, but his understanding of Christianity as a tool for social control clashes with his discourse's underlying assumptions. Macaulay's Minute, published in 1835, influenced by Charles Grant's observations, initially ridicules Oriental learning but struggles to conceive a reformed colonial subject. European humanism's tradition seems limited to envisioning a class of interpreters between rulers and the governed, as seen in the works of Kipling, Forrester, Orwell, Naipaul, and Benedict Anderson's essay on nationalism. Mimicry, situated within the tension between empire and nation, challenges racial and cultural hierarchies, making the national conceptually complex. It exists between mimesis and mimicry, undermining historical monumentality and authority. Mimicry repeats rather than represents, as seen in Decoud's European perspective of Sulaco's civil strife, where folly outweighs ignominy. Decoud, Grant, and Macaulay all parody history, inscribing the colonial text across a resistant body politic in a narrative that defies representation. The pursuit of authenticity through mimicry via writing and repetition is the ironic outcome of partial representation. Mimicry functions without revealing a clear identity behind its mask, disrupting dominant discourses by presenting colonial subjects as inappropriate. Through repeated but incomplete presence, mimicry highlights cultural, racial, and historical differences that challenge colonial authorities' demand for conformity. The act of surveillance becomes a reciprocal gaze where the observer becomes the observed, and partial representation reshapes notions of identity, distancing it from essence. Even respected histories like Eric Stokes's The English Utilitarians in India acknowledge the disruptive gaze of otherness, but ultimately struggle to reconcile it with colonial norms. Colonial textuality, as Freud describes, embodies a form of difference that is almost identical but not quite. This in between space blurs notions of origin, likening individuals of mixed race to white individuals who lack social privilege. Mimicry's visibility is always at the site of prohibition, a form of discourse uttered in forbidden spaces. Colonial mimicry seeks not only to resist signification but also to strategically manipulate presence through metonymy. This involves appropriating inappropriate signifiers of colonial discourse, such as the distinction between Englishness and Anglicization, or the construction of discriminatory identities across cultural norms. These instances of metonymy challenge the metaphoric priority traditionally given to identity and meaning. Mimicry operates along the axis of metonymy, resembling camouflage in its defense of presence by displaying it only partially. Its threat lies in the creation of conflictual and discriminatory identity effects that evade easy categorization, revealing the elusive nature of power without an inherent essence. The encounter between white presence and black resemblance raises questions about the ambivalence of mimicry as a tool of colonial subjection. Mimicry not only undermines narcissistic authority by highlighting differences, but also challenges the authorization of colonial representations. This extends beyond individual subjects' lack of priority to a broader crisis in the conceptualization of colonial identity as subject to regulatory power and representation. The ambivalence of mimicry suggests that colonial culture, often fetishized, can be subversive force. Like a camouflage, mimicry disguises itself, challenging established norms of race, writing, and history. It redefines presence in terms of its otherness, which it simultaneously denies. However, this differs from Foucault's concept of thinking the unthought, which seeks reconciliation with essence. In colonial discourse, the unthought manifests as classificatory confusion, splitting discourse into two attitudes toward reality. One acknowledges reality, while the other replaces it with desires, repeating and re-articulating reality as mimicry. These contradictory articulations result from a disavowal that denies differences, producing authority and belief systems that diverge from civil discourse. Repetitive guilt, justification, pseudoscience, superstition, and arbitrary classifications attempt to normalize the disturbance caused by split discourse, violating rational claims of enlightenment. Colonial authorities' ambivalence fluctuates between mimicry and menace, creating a nearly total difference. In this not quite, not white world, Western objects become erratic artifacts within colonial discourse. Under the racist gaze, black skin is dehumanized into symbols of bestiality and grotesquerie, revealing the phobic myth of a pure white body. Even revered texts like the Bible are dismembered, sometimes traded or used as mundane items.